We're here with Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Michael Creed. Minister, the beef roundtable took place this week. How did it go?
Well, considering the context within which it met, we had a very constructive engagement. I mean, as you're aware, the farm organisations, having called repeatedly for the forum to be convened, as stakeholders didn't turn up. Now that left me engaging with the other participants, and considering that starting point, it was quite a useful engagement, because obviously the big picture is this has been a very difficult year for farming. Exceptionally difficult for the beef sector, because allied to the difficulties associated with the weather, there's been price pressures as well. So, against that backdrop, the engagement with stakeholders, and particularly with the meat processors, was really important. And the hallmark of the agricultural and agri-food sector generally is, the collaborative endeavour of all the stakeholders. That's what has given us the success story that Irish agri-food is. And if there is to be a resolution of the difficulties that the Beef Forum faces, it has to be a resolution that's engineered through the participation of all the stakeholders in engagement and dialogue.
So those protesting outside Agriculture House, would they have been better off inside around the table?
Well, look, that's an issue for farm organisations to determine themselves. The forum was the poorer for the fact that they weren't there. That's undoubtedly the case. They bring a unique and distinctive voice to those deliberations. That having been said, we did have a very useful engagement with the other stakeholders, and in particular with the meat processors, discussing the international market, new market opportunities, live exports, the potential of producer organisations to address some of the issues in the beef sector, to give more power to the farming interests in the food chain. All those issues were discussed.
What was said about there's been a lot of criticism recently in the last couple of weeks in terms of price lows. How was that discussed, and what was the outcome?
Well, look, as you're aware, Claire, the Stakeholder Forum has been repeatedly advised that it's not a forum for price fixing or price negotiations. As Minister for Agriculture, I have no role to play in that. That having been said, I mean, there was an acknowledgement that there is a very difficult international trading environment, that as for an island that's exporting 90% of what it produces impacts perhaps disproportionately on us. In that context, the difference between UK and Irish beef prices was discussed. But,
What was the outcome there?
Well, I mean, the processors, gave an explanation from their point of view as to what the reason is, having to do with UK preference, for EU beef, a market that, from the point of view of domestic supply is in deficit. So, there are some of the reasons that were put forward. But we did have a broad discussion around all of those issues.
There's been a lot of criticism as well in terms of the level of engagement of the meat industry, of the processors with the farmers, with suppliers on the ground. Was that discussed today?
Well, I did raise with the processors, and to be fair, they did indicate an ongoing willingness to engage with their customers through the farm organisations. I hope that happens, because the current situation is to nobody's benefit, not to the benefit of the industry or to farmers, to have a breakdown in communications.
As it stands, the processors communicate through Meat Industry Ireland with the suppliers. Do you think that is working?
Well, I mean, they communicate around the forum, they communicate bilaterally, and be it the IFA or the ICMSA or the ICSA, farmers choose to engage via their representative bodies, and whether that's in form of bilateral between the representative body of the meat industry, their constituent members, through the MII or otherwise, dialogue is really important, and the industry did indicate today an ongoing willingness to engage, and that's welcome.
But yet that doesn't really seem to be the case when you talk to farmers, when you talk to suppliers. If you compare the beef situation from the industry level to ground level, to the dairy side from industry level to ground level, they're worlds apart.
Well, they are, because the model of ownership is entirely different. I mean, the dairy processors are by and large dairy cooperatives owned by their shareholders. The meat industry is different in structure. But nonetheless, the point which I emphasised today at the forum was, you can't have a meat processing industry without having beef farmers who see a career opportunity long term in the beef sector. And, you know, that's a fundamental starting point. The markets we export to may be in difficulty now, but the long term relationship demands engagement and dialogue and discussion about issues.
What about Brexit? Was that discussed at length today? We're 6 months out at this stage.
It was. We did have a discussion. It wasn't a major point of discussion, but we did have some engagement around that issue in the context of the department's preparations. There was inquiries as to where we were at in that regard. And as you know, there have been government decisions of July and more recently, which outlined the level of preparations that we're undertaking in terms of recruitment, in terms of IT infrastructure, the built environment infrastructure that may be required post the UK's departure. We're also into contingency planning for a hard Brexit. So all those issues were discussed.
In recent weeks, Minister, a new group has formed called the Beef Plan Group. They're a splinter group of the Irish Farmers Association. Now, not all exclusively members of the IFA, but largely. Are you aware of this group? Have they reached out to you? Have you seen their proposals that they have put forward?
No, I mean, the engagement here in the department is through the farm organisations. I obviously am aware. I've seen reference in the media to this group, but I haven't had direct contact from them. I'm unaware that they've made any submission to the department at this stage, and we continue to engage here with farm organisations.
What proposals are the farm organisations putting forward in terms of a beef plan?
Well, look, I mean, you're aware of the high-profile campaign around the €200 per cow. I've always said from the outset that that's not something that the department could countenance for many reasons, not least because of the cost, but also because, very often the department is accused of lacking joined-up thinking. If we were, on the one hand, to acquiesce to that demand for a coupled payment, it would run contrary to everything which we've been doing in the beef sector in terms of investing money in quality as opposed to quantity. And what we want to make sure is, through the Beef Data and Genomics Scheme, in which we're investing €300 million under the current Rural Development Programme, is that we improve the genetic merit of our beef herd, and in so doing, improve the profitability of the sector. And we have harvested a minefield of data as a consequence of that, and that is an enormous resource to the industry. And I think it is only if we stick with this endeavour and continue to participate in the BDGP that we will reach a tipping point where that data will become the engine of informed decision making in the beef breeding, which should lead to greater profitability.
So the suckler, when it comes to the suckler payment, the €200 per cow payment, you have repeatedly stated that that's not a runner, it's not workable. But why do you think the farm organisations continue to push for it?
Well, I think to be fair, at one level, I understand it's a demand for more support for the sector, and I do appreciate, whether it's in the context of the budget or in the context of CAP reform, that's a legitimate ask. More support for the beef sector, but it must be consistent with the direction of travel which we're taking under BDGP, and also, consistent with our targets under climate change, which are quite significant and onerous. And that's why a coupled payment would run contrary to everything we've been pursuing in terms of public policy for a number of years.
What about the budget, Minister? It's coming next week. What's in it for farmers?
Well, the overwhelming objective of the budget is to deliver, for the first time in many years, a balanced budget, and that's good for every citizen in the state. We are now 10 years out from the financial crash. In reality, we're probably closer to the next crash than we are to the last crash, though we're living with the consequences still of the last crash. And having a balanced budget, establishing a rainy day fund, is the right thing to do to ensure that we are able to face into the future with confidence, given the fact that there are significant headwinds out there. You mentioned Brexit earlier. There are other challenges in the international trading environment which are capable of landing seismic shocks on our economy. So prudence and a rainy day fund are the critical objectives of the budget. Within that, of course, I'm acutely conscious of my obligations as the Minister for Agriculture to take a holistic approach to the agricultural sector and see what are the areas that need prudent investment. And in that context, obviously, the aforementioned beef sector and others are to the forefront of my mind.
Finally, Minister, the protest did take place outside today. We're told there are between 150 to 300 present at it. Were you surprised by that number, by that turnout? Was it what you were expecting?
Well, look, I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't see that or commentary on it. I have been engaged within the forum up to lunchtime. I was at the National Dairy Milk Quality Awards in the afternoon. I subsequently met with the IFA for their pre-budget submission. So I haven't seen any commentary on the protest. I understand there was a lot of protests around Leinster House today, including the issues being raised by the farming protest on the beef sector, but I'm not aware of the numbers. And look, protest is a legitimate campaigning instrument, and I acknowledge that, but I would like to see the farmers' organisations and leaders back in the room for future stakeholder engagement at the earliest possible opportunity.
That's all we have time for, Minister. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Claire.